All right, so in the 20-something vans that I've built, I would say maybe a third of them the customer came back or inquired afterwards about hanging up something on the wall, you know, some kind of trinkets, some kind of piece of art or something that they wanted. And it can be a little tricky because if it's a fabric covered wall, you know, you got to drill through it a special way so you don't accidentally grab that fabric and destroy the panel. And then just in general, you go, well, you probably shouldn't drill here because, you know, there's sheet metal behind that. Oh, over here we've got a wire run behind the wall. So it can be a little tricky to, like, after the van is built, to then decide you want to drill some more holes through it. So in this van, to kind of make it a little, you know, look a little more like our van instead of just like this sanitary, just like clean kind of hotel space, I've been kind of looking for a way to be able to kind of personalize our walls a little bit. And I know my girlfriend would appreciate this too. You know, we'll pick up some postcards along the way, we'll find little trinkets, and it's nice to just add these little mementos, you know, as you come across them on some of your trips. So in this van, to kind of have an option to be able to personalize some of these surfaces, essentially this area up here above the rear doors, this part of this rear door wall panel, and then as well over here, you know, behind the driver's seat, the entire upper portion of this wall, what I've decided to do is essentially go through and line all of this with 1/4 inch thick cork behind that fabric. What that allows for is that you come across a little trinket or something on the road and you want to put in your van, it's pretty easy to just take some little pins and then you can just put little mementos on the wall that you've decided, you know, just kind of bring back some memories. So that's kind of what I've decided to do in this van, is all of this is lined with that cork behind the fabric. And I thought I would just share a couple of things that I learned in the process of doing this that will hopefully alleviate some headaches for you. All right, so the first thing I want to bring up is that the cork, if you buy a sheet of it, it'll probably come in a roll just because they need to do that to ship it. And you will read online that to get it to flatten out, you should just put some weights on it to kind of force it flat for a couple days. Well, here, let me show you this. This is a remnant I have from the project. It has been essentially laying between these sheets of plywood in my plywood rack for like over a month now. And the second I pull this weight off, this sheet of cork, it just wants to still curl up. And that makes working with it a pretty annoying process. So that's just something to be aware of, that you'll probably be dealing with that throughout the build. Maybe if it's the middle of the summer and you could like leave it outside, maybe that heat will help to kind of reflatten it. But for me, it was curly from the start, and leaving it, you know, for days or even a month to try to get it to flatten out didn't seem to do a whole lot. And for basically all kind of fabric and wall panel upholstery stuff in my vans, I like to use 3M70, but you do need this kind of, you know, more industrial setup for it. So I would say if you don't have access to this adhesive, I think almost any contact adhesive would work well to attach the cork to the wood panel, and then a spray adhesive like 3M90 would be totally sufficient to attach the fabric to the cork. So on that rear door panel, you can see it's got a line here because not the entire panel is wrapped in cork. And over here above the sofa, we've got the same thing happening, only this top portion has got cork because essentially the backrest of the sofa will come up to here. So in order to kind of make this transition look a little nicer and smoother, I ended up using essentially a 45-degree angle chamfer bit like this on a router, and that allowed me to just cut that at a 45-degree angle. So then when wrapping the fabric over it, it just looks like just a better transition there. So that's something you could play with as well if you're not covering the entire panel in cork. Now, another thing I learned in the process of this is that it does give the wall sort of kind of this dimply texture, especially if you have just like a single light source that's just like very kind of low angle raking across the surface. So if that bothers you, you know, you could maybe run like a layer of maybe 1/8 inch Landau foam between the cork and the fabric. For me, this wall panel is done, so unfortunately, I'm gonna have to live with that. That said, if you just have a lot of ambient light, kind of like, you know, back here, and if you imagine camping, you know, there's usually just a lot of kind of diffuse light coming through the windows, coming through the windshield. You really can't see that, but that is just something to be aware of, that it doesn't leave a perfectly flat texture to your wall panel. And then one more thing to just bring up is you want to be kind of careful with these panels when you're working with them on the bench. I actually had a stray screw laying on the bench, and I flopped this panel on top of it when I was working on the back of it. And now I've got a little bit of a dent here. So thankfully it's not in too obvious of a location right there, but you know, if this was right in the middle of your panel, you could see how that would be pretty annoying. So just good to note, you know, be careful with these things when you're working with them on the bench before they're up in the van. All right, and besides these cork covered wall panels, another thing aesthetically that I like to do in my vans is these speaker covers. Now, if you have purchased speakers in maybe the last couple years for cars, some of the styling on them, I would say is something that I would have appreciated in high school, but nowadays it is just kind of a monstrosity and it is not something I would want. And what is supposed to be almost kind of like a home space. So in this van, I ended up building some custom speaker covers. As you can see, I've got one up here and then a matching one at the other end of this light bar. And then on the other side of the van, I've got another little speaker cover here with a tweeter. And the tweeter, that is the factory cover, but it's just a black circle, so it's not too bad. And then over here, while those first three I will say were press fit, this last one, the speaker was just too deep due to the ceiling depth. And as a result, this one is screwed on. But I think these black speaker covers are just a lot more mature looking and just a much less of an eyesore than some of those metallic kind of, I don't know, dragon, transformer inspired things you get on some factory speakers. So making these isn't too difficult, and let me just quickly show you the process that I use. Now, in order to make these speaker covers, you're essentially trying to make a ring out of wood and then wrap it in fabric. I use this specific, what they call, speaker cloth, but I don't know if it makes any difference. They say that this is acoustically transparent, but I think for how much hearing I have left, I don't think I'd notice a difference. There are a couple advantages of this stuff though. If you don't want to use black, I think you would want to use a fabric that, like this, has 4-directional stretch essentially. I think this really helps to wrap the speaker, ring better. And then even though this is fairly transparent looking, when you've actually got it like mounted around a piece of wood, it does a really good job not actually showing you that wood color through, which I think helps, so you don't see that. It just looks like a nice black circle. So that's two properties you may want to look for, is that stretch and that it doesn't let the color come through. But you could totally use a different color fabric than if you found something with those properties. Now, to actually make the wood ring, for this application, I used 1/2-inch thick plywood, and depending on the size speakers you have, you may be able to maybe get a couple, nesting hole saws like this. So you could basically cut one hole and then the next, and then it would just leave a little ring here. And that may work for a very specific speaker. But for me, what I like to do is I would recommend looking up how to make a router circle jig. You can make really intricate ones, but for small projects like this, I honestly just use a small crap piece of plywood. You end up taking your router base and you screw it to here, and then depending on where you sink a screw hole here, the entire router essentially pivots around that point. So as you can see, I did a lot of fine tuning for this project. The way 3 of these speaker covers fit is just a press fit into like a recessed area where the speaker mounts. So it takes a little bit of trial and error to get the diameter just right, so it presses in quite snugly that I'm not worried it's going to fall out, but I'm also not worried about breaking the ring as I'm trying to push it in there. So making one of these out of a scrap piece of plywood is really easy, and now that it has served its purpose, I will probably toss this and I have no hard feelings about it. And then the last step is to just attach the fabric to the ring. I like to use super glue for this function. If you use too much, you may get a little bit of crustiness on the show side of your speaker covers. So you want to apply it kind of carefully, but essentially I find it easiest to essentially attach one point, stretch the fabric across to the opposite corner and attach that, and then do the same thing with the 2 perpendicular spots, and then just work back through pulling that fabric over, applying a little super glue, using the accelerator to dry it, and just working your way all the way around. So then for the finished product, these speaker covers, now they are press fit in here. I can't pry them out if I try, but they're a fairly secure fit up there. And I think that is just a much nicer look than some kind of factory catastrophe. And I will say that this back one, it's got a little bit of a chamfer here to make it look a little softer. And then I did just use some black screws to attach that one. So if you don't have a recessed speaker hole or like a speaker mount, so you can just mount them to the surface, and I think they still look quite nice. All right, so besides these speaker covers and the cork, the last thing I want to talk about today is actually how to cover these channels in the roof. Now this is a pretty unique situation because in this van being a short top, I'm trying to keep as much height between these channels as possible, or these ribs. So I've actually only got a 1/4 inch of foam here wrapped in some fabric. And then just from previous experiences, I know that trying to install or like wrap these in fabric in place can just be kind of a disaster. You're trying not to get, adhesive over a spray. You're trying to keep these pieces going down nice and flat. The fabric that you're trying to glue on here, you got to make sure to wrap your edges so you don't have fraying. So it's just a lot easier to kind of come up with some kind of channel material that could cap this, and then you can just install this fabric on the workbench and it's a lot easier. So I spent quite a bit of time scouring the internet looking for some kind of plastic U channel, plastic square channel, plastic extrusions, and I just could not come up with a solution that would allow me to cap these channels and not cost hundreds of dollars. A lot of them had square corners as well, which wasn't ideal. I wanted that rounded corner. And what I ended up coming up with is actually just some vinyl gutter downspouts. These are 2" by 3", and it turns out you can go on the table saw, rip them down, and that is what these caps are made out of. This is what a little leftover piece looks like after having ripped it. And then you've just got lengths of this that I went ahead and pre-drilled the holes for so I could install all those rib nuts up there, and then I can just, in the relaxing state of my workbench, wrap these in fabric. So I thought using these gutters was just a great, like less than $30 solution to cap all these roof ribs. So if that's something you're trying to do in your van to maximize height, I would recommend you check these out at the local store and see if they'll work for you. All right, so that's just like 3 kind of finish aesthetic based things that I've done so far on the van that I thought were pretty unique. Thanks so much for watching as always, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.